Hi, I'm Jamie Wright, middle school librarian, and this episode is specifically for adults who want to support reading in upper elementary and middle school students. A lot of the information I'm sharing is based on my own experience as an educator, as well as research and information from Richard Allington, Margaret Murga, Donalyn Miller, and Penny Kittle, among others. If you're interested in more details or following up to check the veracity of my information, there are a lot of other details I can share, but I'll try to keep this reasonably short so it's an overview. And of course, you can always dive in for more specifics if you have questions. It's always a good idea to reach out to your librarian. I'm going to be talking about this in two parts, the why and the how. And if you're listening, you probably already have at least some part of the why reading matters. So it could be that you yourself are an avid reader and your child or your students are less engaged readers. Maybe they actively avoid reading, or maybe reading is okay with them, but they tend to choose other activities instead. Or it could be that you know literacy is important for education and career readiness, so you want to re engage students or your child. Maybe your child is already an avid reader and you just want to be sure you're doing everything possible to support success. So, you might already know that reading widely exposes students to lots of vocabulary. There's a 1980 study with a well known graphic that compares the number of words readers would be exposed to if they read for 1 minute or 5 minutes or 20 minutes per day. And you could see how that really adds up over time. Vocabulary knowledge has been shown to be a huge advantage in standardized test scores because the ability to read and understand information matters on any type of written exam. So, knowing the difference between content terminology, reading passages, or even understanding the exam directions, like the difference between explain or describe, for example. Reading also exposes students to a lot of background knowledge that they might not otherwise have, particularly with historical fiction, which can humanize a lot of issues from the past, as well as nonfiction and other types of fiction that have really specific settings. It could be related to different fields like sports or cooking or types of competitions, lots of ways to include different concepts, career types, and potential interests. You might also be aware that research indicates that fiction readers tend to exhibit more empathy to other people. So, the ability to immerse yourself in someone else's story and feel something for that other person tends to translate to real world behaviors. And we also talk about reading stamina, the ability to read for longer and longer segments of time, as something worth building, especially as students move from middle school to high school or college, so that they can access more demanding texts when those appear in academics. So, just like building muscles or running endurance or learning to play an instrument, reading is something you get better at as you do more of it. So, stamina becomes a goal in itself. An interesting point to consider, especially as screens and notifications habitually interrupt our thoughts and our activities, is that reading might be practicing stamina or attention focus, not just for reading, but also on sustained attention more generally. In other words, engaging in an activity like reading, which requires sustained focus, might build or support sustained attention in other areas in addition to reading. I know that after I've spent a half an hour reading or exercise or practicing an instrument, I feel a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction or even fullness somehow that I don't get if I spend that time scrolling social media or binging TV episodes. So, the immediacy of our digital worlds really trains our brains to expect rewards and feedback from external sources instead of sitting comfortably in our own headspace. Another important factor in the why of reading matters that I point out to students is that being able to read and understand information is a kind of power that leads to a certain level of independence. Being able to read means you can transport yourself to fictional worlds, which is amazing and enjoyable. And it can make you think deeply about important ideas. It can help you consider new perspectives. It can teach you that you're not alone. Reading also allows you to get critical information about how to do things like cooking or building or designing or fixing. Reading is an important skill when it comes to deciphering advertisements. How are you going to spend your money? Speeches, contracts, laws, ballots, policies, navigation, graphs and statistics, maps, opinion pieces, and news articles. Depending on others to explain things to you might be reliable in some circumstances, but it could be a critical problem in others. So, the why of reading is that it's both an enjoyable activity and a crucial skill with multiple transferable benefits. People who are readers are not better people than those who don't read, but reading is something that can help make life better for people. It's worth the time and effort. For upper elementary and middle school students, understanding the why is more powerful than doing something because it's expected or demanded or required. As soon as you tell someone they have to do something, it's often much less appealing. Choice is a really key component for building successful reading lives, and adults too often really muck this up for students. We want you to read, so hurry up and get a book. But wait, don't read that. You've read that before. And don't read that. It's just a graphic novel and it's not a real book. And that one is reverse. So it's super short. Come on, can't you read a real thing that's on your level? Right? Pretty quickly, it doesn't feel like the student has that much choice here. I sometimes start professional development with teachers about the importance of independence reading by asking them if they all enjoyed reading over the summer. Did everyone pick up some Dostoevsky or a little Csikszentmihalyi? Occasionally, yes, someone did, but usually no. So adults in their quote real reading lives don't seem to independently choose challenging reading material in their free time all the time. I am an outlier from the general population because, as a librarian with librarian friends and a natural inclination to read, I tend to make friends with people who also read a lot. And there's no contest for me about who reads the most. I'm really comfortable with who I am as a reader and the volume and quality of what I read and what I gain from my reading life. And I will tell you that about a quarter of what I read could be considered on my reading level. About 60% of what I read is for students so that I can make quality recommendations about what to read and what to purchase. The other 15% is just for fun. So maybe rereading or trying a short book in Spanish, which I'm still learning, or picking up something light because my last book was pretty dense. So the books I read for student recommendations cannot be considered at my reading level. But I'm not less of a reader because I spend so much time reading them. I gain a lot from them, not just professionally, but also I personally enjoy many of them and I add to my own knowledge base. Further, we can look at best selling lists and see that huge swaths of our reading population devour paperback romances, westerns, mysteries, and true crime stories. So many people are voluntarily buying and reading and sharing these books just for fun. That sounds like real reading. So, yet we get really judgy about students when they choose certain types of books and we try to push them into some sort of approved set of books that we have chosen. So it's unrealistic to demand that kids choose books to read and then we immediately criticize what they choose when they had been genuinely excited to read it. Too often, the result is that a student selects a different approved book to carry around but never opens it. So this stat recommendation is solely from my own reading life, but when I conference with students, I can sometimes suggest, okay, maybe one out of every 4 or 5 books could be a book that's a stretch for them. How's that going? And do they need recommendations to find something new or more challenging at this time? So just a general guideline for monitoring how much are you stretching yourself as a reader, and giving yourself the latitude to read what you truly enjoy. I'll also point out that sometimes life gets hard, and rereading a familiar story with a safe, cheerful ending can be a really lovely escape for readers. And while I'm often recommending standalone books, I understand that students love a good series, not just because they can't wait to find out what happens next, but sometimes choosing a book is so overwhelming that just finding something familiar, familiar characters, a familiar format, a reasonably familiar plot, it can feel very safe instead of taking a risk with a book that might be too hard or too dull or too demanding or not enough of something that the reader wanted. There's a whole lot we can say about graphic novels, including a University of Oregon research study that shows vocabulary in graphic novels typically feature more rare words than in standard adult fiction books. Also, the brain work required to analyze the illustrative details, especially when the pictures don't always tell the same story that unreliable narrator is trying to sell, that's fairly sophisticated. Graphic novels are highly appealing to a generation growing up bombarded with visual media, and they're just as real as any other type of book. And so are ebooks and audiobooks, which can allow English language learners and readers with dyslexia the chance to access and enjoy more complex stories than their decoding skills might allow them to read independently right now. For example, a sixth grader with dyslexia might struggle to decode the words in a Percy Jackson book independently, but not really enjoy a simpler text that she can decode on her own. An audiobook might give her the chance to enjoy that Percy Jackson story by listening and possibly following along in the print book, so she can truly enjoy the independent reading's benefits instead of just feeling the practice and the struggle. When I talk about book choice, I do want to make a distinction between books that students are asked to read as part of a curriculum, where there's a list of books from a certain genre or that explore a particular theme, or it's a class novel study. That kind of reading has a different purpose than independent reading, which requires that students have genuine choice if it's going to be successful. We know that students are going to be reading a wide variety of texts for almost all of their classes alongside their self-selected independent reading, which is no less important for reasons outlined earlier. So adults who support students in reading can't pretend we're about choice and then nitpick a student's choice. Nobody is standing over your shoulder judging your beach read or the crime thriller you stayed up too late to finish, and students want to enjoy the books that they read too. The obvious question is, what do you do about a student who consistently reads the same book or the same series or, quote, easy books over and over without sufficient challenge or variety? So my honest answer is I would always prefer to see someone genuinely reading and rereading than fake reading. And this issue, which is common, can be addressed with short reading conferences and check-ins with the student. So you could say, I noticed that you read that book a few times this year. What do you like about it? And the answer to that simple question can be incredibly important for that student as a reader if you get real information. Maybe the student doesn't have good skills considering and selecting a completely new book. Maybe that book is attached to memories with a loved one who's going through a hard time, so they're rereading it for that reason. Maybe the book has an incredibly happy series of events, and the student is not having a lot of happy scenes in real life at the moment. Maybe it's the only book the student owns, and the student doesn't know how to use the school library and can't get to a public library or bookstore. Maybe the student is avoiding reading, but knows this book well enough to do an assignment about it if asked. So, depending on the answer to that question, it might be appropriate to chat with a librarian for book recommendations and book finding strategies, or to have a conversation about reading goals and benefits and get the student to articulate some short term plans. Like we talked about earlier, okay, maybe the last 4 or 5 or 10 books I've read haven't been a challenge. So maybe I'm going to make it a goal that I'm going to choose something a little bit different or out of my comfort zone this next time. Um, maybe, finding ways to make reading social so the student can talk with other students who like similar books and then read something new and discuss it with other readers, or to let that student reread the book as many times as is needed, or get the student help to make reading more successful and less frustrating. There are a lot of different possible helpful responses to this scenario, but assuming that the student is lazy and work avoidant and addressing that with a demand to just read an on-level book is one of the least helpful approaches. If we value choice, then we have to make space to partner with the reader we're supporting and figure out processes for the next successful step. I have had students enter the library telling me their parent wants them to get a, quote, real book. So I ask them what interests them, and after some probing, and sometimes it's about the last movie they saw they liked if they can't think of a book, I'll offer recommendations. I used to ignore the length of a book. So as a reader, I'm not intimidated by long books and I don't dismiss short ones, but I have learned that book length is a really important factor to many students. If they are feeling overwhelmed and reading already isn't a go-to activity, a 400-page book just might not be in the cards. And I know that when I've gone through hard stages, sometimes my brain is just not able to process a lot of new and difficult information. So short and easy and familiar reads are really comforting during those times. So, depending on the vibe I'm getting from a student, I might ask, are you in the mood for a shorter book or is any length okay? And this question is really helpful to honor a student's choice. And if my real purpose is to find a book they genuinely want to read, then I need to know if book length might be a key factor. A lot of fantasy books top 500 pages, and some readers are here for that, but others just want something around 200 pages that they can finish successfully and not need to exert a lot of energy to digest. So I might offer a graphic novel or a free verse book if a student wants something shorter, only to be told that their parents said it can't be a graphic novel or one of those poem ones. It needs to be, quote, real. I definitely understand that's coming from a place of wanting their child to improve at reading and excel at academics and to take their reading seriously. And we generally find something that works. But I also think sometimes we adults forget how demanding middle school is and what a benefit it can be to sink into a book that's not asking us to work excessively to experience the story. So, book choice is such a key part of the how to support readers, but another one is access. Are students able to find books and have books available to read? This one is on us as a society. We want to be sure that our schools are full of lots of different books, not just in a school library and the public library, but also in our classrooms and our homes. Books have to be available. The other factor with access is time, and here is where adults can really help. Everyone is too busy. We just are. Teachers almost always have too many assignments and activities to keep up with, and families almost always have too much scheduled or too many demands. So, a message that adults unintentionally convey to students is reading is an important thing for you to do, but I'm too busy to spend time doing it. If students do not see adults reading, they are not going to believe that it's something important that matters, no matter how often adults insist that it's important. The great thing about this is that reading really is a social activity, and it's truly a great way to connect with upper elementary and middle school students who are often busy with lots of activities and you don't have a lot of time to spend together. So, as a parent, you can both read a book that your student recommends and talk about it together. You can each read separate copies or listen to an audiobook together, or even keep up with read alouds and trade chapters or pages. You can involve the whole family or just the two of you. Alternately, you could read a book that your student recommends, and you can offer a couple of options to your student that you recommend. And then you each read different books and talk about them as you go for a walk or go out to lunch or wait in a line somewhere, or however you want to do it. And keeping the experience positive and about connecting through books, even if you didn't like them, that's important. It shouldn't become a time when you're quizzing the student about plot points or literary themes or something. The less it feels like a student chore and the more it feels like fun time together, the better. You know how when they're little and you snuggle together with a book and they ask for another one, and it's partly because the story is great and they want to hear it again, and partly because it's so great to sit close to you and have this time together. Sometimes middle school students start to pull away and become less communicative, and having time to read together, even if you're not snuggling anymore, it builds a bridge for you to keep talking about things, even if really personal problems are too difficult for the student to share regularly. And then after you finish your books, keep going, read other books, and be on the lookout for books you can read together and recommend to each other. You could designate time as a family that's non negotiable where everybody reads. And if that physical time together can't be every night, maybe it can be 20 minutes every Wednesday and Sunday, or however you work it out. When reading is visible, students know it's important. Another way to help support readers in terms of book access and time is to consider where you have opportunities to read that you aren't taking advantage of. If you're in the habit of taking a book with you, it opens up a lot of reading time. So instead of Candy Crush on your phone or an app or whatever, you could read a chapter or two. It could be that you read an audiobook when you walk the dog, or have an ebook ready to read in the school parking lot before dismissal, or a print book at the hair salon or the dentist. All of that modeling of making time to read throughout the day demonstrates to students that they can carve out time too. For teachers, I will tell you it is a powerful personal thing when you take a student's book recommendation and you read it and then you get back to them about it, or when you know them well enough to leave a book and a sticky note on their desk saying, "Hey, I think you would really like this particular title." And you're busy. You have way too many tasks. So reading might feel like an indulgence or an optional thing, but it is the best credibility in the world during a reading conference when you have actually read the book and you aren't just asking generic questions about it. That's you walking the talk and showing you truly value reading for yourself, not just as an assignment. And as much as you are asked to do and have your students do, independent reading time really does matter. So carving that time out in class is a struggle, but it's important. Even if it seems like something students should be able to find time to do on their own, many students will not read if they're not given time to read in school. So we have to give them time in school. It can also be a helpful time for students to calm down or quiet social or personal issues they might be trying to handle and escape into a story. Read alouds in class are also really beneficial, even picture books for secondary students. Jillian Heisey's work with Classroom Book a Day has a lot more about this. These read alouds expose students to different background knowledge and vocabulary. They give the class a shared reading experience that can be used as mentor texts for literary concepts, writing pieces, perspectives, historical and current events, and lots more. You can refer back to these books in class discussions because the whole class understands the reference. And read alouds ask students to do nothing but listen and think and experience a story together. It's not for a grade, it's not a performance, it's not a social risk, it's an experience. It's so worth the time. When it comes to extrinsic rewards in reading, I'm not a huge fan. So, anytime we're trying to build a worthwhile habit that lasts and we insert a reward into the process, it can signal that the habit is only worth doing to earn the thing, whether it's money for good grades or a pizza coupon for reading 500 minutes or whatever it is. So, if you look at Daniel Pink's research on motivation or even ask adult readers, are you reading to earn a swag bag? I mean, it's clear extrinsic motivators aren't why people who read read. But I will say that I came to work at a Title I school where there had been a tradition of logging minutes and earning a free ticket to a water amusement park. And I didn't want to be the reason families couldn't earn that ticket. So I offered the program as an option. And I had some very committed, supportive families tell me that their kids were so excited to read to earn those tickets. And that, in fact, it jump started their interest in reading habit that they hadn't had before. So I don't think we can build sustainable reading habits around bribery, but I do think sometimes the chance at a prize can be an extra kick or even an excuse that a student needs to take time to read. We should also talk about book levels, which is not as exact a science as some people seem to believe. So, if you have a program where kids go to the library and they're only allowed to check out books at their reading level, that's a problem. It just is, full stop. That is not reading choice or building book love. That is drawing a lot of attention to academic progress between different students instead of teaching students to select books they enjoy and get time to read those books. Bookstores are not organized by reading level, even though adults have a variety of reading skills. Students should be able to learn how to choose books they might like to read as part of their independent reading skills. I have worked with a lot of elementary children who struggle to read on grade level, and sometimes they would check out superhero books that had some very small text and speech bubbles with vocabulary that student probably couldn't read very easily. But they could enjoy the book and look at the pictures and sound out the words, and they had some familiarity with that character because of a movie or a show, and so they really wanted to read that book and they were excited to check it out. If I had said, "Oh, honey, that's not on your level. You can't read that book," that would have really squashed that child's investment in coming to the library. And it would have been a huge lesson that I don't really let students choose books that they want. And particularly for reluctant readers, choice is a huge factor to honor. It's also true that when that child takes the book back to class or takes the book home, it's a problem if he can't read any of it. So, adults can support readers by giving them strategies to test a book to see if it looks interesting and if he can read it without a lot of support. So, this could be the five finger rule or opening up to a random place in the first chapter and reading through a paragraph to see if it seems appealing and accessible. And if not yet, it's important to communicate that it might not work right now, but later on in a couple of months or next year, and those both seem like forever to young kids, but still, um, they can go back and try that book later on. And then the adult can immediately offer something else that's more accessible, but still gives the vibe the student was trying to find with that first book. And that is where adult readers really matter because the more that they have read, the better they can make good recommendations to all kinds of readers. Reading is a lifelong process. There will never be a moment we check off a list and say, okay, you have mastered all reading. Engaging with this process as an entity that we constantly revisit, where sometimes we read books about new topics that interest us, and sometimes we reread old favorites, and sometimes we're part of book clubs that get us reading books we might not have picked up, and sometimes we get immersed in a series. That is all part of the process. Systems and programs like Goodreads or Storygraph or Beanstack, they can help readers own their reading lives and be aware of trends and habits. It's really useful to look back at your completed books and notice that you thought you read a lot of historical fiction, but really you read a lot of mysteries. Or it's helpful to look through and remember a book you enjoyed and wonder, oh, does that same author have any other books I might like to read next? Over time, these reading records can tell the story of your life too. You can see the times when you were moving to a different country and starting a new school and you didn't read very much, or that summer when you read 60 books from that series, or when you and a friend were exchanging science fiction recommendations, or you went through a phase of reading a lot of biographies. So, these tools of looking at your reading habits are only useful if the records are honest. Just like writing down what you eat or how much you exercise if you're trying to lose weight or how much you've practiced your musical instrument every day, it's not helpful if it's not honest. Capturing that look at your reading habits and noticing the types of titles and genres or how much time is spent reading, that can be very helpful reflection to keep moving forward. So much depends on individuals and their circumstances, but if any of these ideas have helped you support students in their reading lives, I'm really happy about that. Reach out to your librarian with questions and book recommendation needs. A book is always a good idea.